In only a few years, Carson Wentz went from an up-and-coming superstar to getting tossed aside by Washington. So the question is, what happened?
Really earned the respect of his teammates with that toughness, going for a deep ball, has a man behind the defense, it's caught!
If we go back to 2017, Carson was going into the second season of his career and coming off a rookie year where he put up over 3,700 through the year. Although let's just say the 14 picks were a bit rough. Nonetheless, in what was his sophomore season in Philly, Carson played like he did back in North Dakota State game after game, as he was quickly able to establish himself as one of the most exciting players in football that year.
Right, and throws, and is it intercepted or a touchdown? It's caught in the back of the end zone.
Although Carson was fresh on the scene, he didn't play like it, as his 1,310 touchdown start in the first 5 games that season launched him into the MVP race, and he was able to stay in it week after week. But although it seemed like things were shaping up for the former North Dakota stud to get some hardware, reality hit, and hit hard.
Well, Joe, as you can see, when Carson Wentz was trying to run into the sideline, his legs were tangled up.
Nearing the end of what felt like a Cinderella season for what was then the highest drafted quarterback out of a FCS school, Carson tore his ACL, and so he had to miss the rest of the year, and not only just watch his chances at MVP fall through his fingertips, but saw his team go on to win a Super Bowl without him.
And they're going to snap it, and it's Trey Burton who throws caught. Foles, touchdown.
Turns out that Carson wasn't all that happy either, as former teammate Darren Sproles reportedly had to tell him to be happy for the team's success instead of just moping around. But nonetheless, my man still made a Pro Bowl, was second team All-Pro, and got a ring, so it wasn't all that bad. And so with all that in mind, going into 2018, things were looking up, and even though Carson had to sit out the first 2 games to continue his recovery, he was eventually able to come back and did pretty well. In 11 games, he put up over 3,020 touchdowns, along with a career best nearly 70% completion percentage, even though he once again couldn't finish the season because of this time a back injury. Nonetheless, things seemed to be going well for the Wentz man, but it seems like he was a bit full of himself based on a piece made by Philly Voice that anonymously interviewed a dozen Eagles players. And interestingly enough, they found Carson to be egotistical and selfless, doing stuff like not listening to the OC and calling unnecessary audibles. So needless to say, behind the scenes, things were not as peachy keen as they seemed on the football field. So although Carson was able to follow up that season with a career best over 4,000 yards and 27 touchdowns, and upon that signed a $130 million contract, it was simply a smokescreen for what came in 2020. After drafting Oklahoma standout Jalen Hurts in the second round of that draft, there was an added pressure on Carson to keep up his level of play, and upon that hopefully win a playoff game. But although he had put together a solid career with the Eagles to that point, everything fell apart before his very eyes.
15. Wentz throwing, and there's the interception.
Even though Carson was coming off one of his best seasons the previous year, he just completely fell apart in 2020 and eventually was benched going into week 14, at which point he was leading the league in interceptions thrown, sacks taken, and total turnovers.
Are you serious right now, bro?
In a matter of a few years, Carson went from the poster boy to the backup. So needless to say, the writing was on the wall for what happened next.
The divorce that seemed inevitable, Philadelphia Eagles agreeing to trade Carson Wentz to the Indianapolis Colts.
Sorry to stop the video, but since you're here, it'd be awesome if you could subscribe, like, turn on post notifications, and comment down below if you think Carson will be a starter once again. But anyways, back to the video. Wentz was traded to the Colts in exchange for a 3rd and 1st round pick, as he was reunited with former Philly OC Frank Reich, who is now the head honcho in Indy. So with that in mind, if there was anywhere where Carson would be able to bounce back, it would be with his bud Frank in the Colts. So let's just say that many were curious about what Wentz would do in Naptown. A foot injury during training camp was a bit of a roadblock considering that it required surgery, but even then he was still able to make the season opener against Seattle. In that game, Carson put up over 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. So even though the Colts ended up losing by nearly 2 touchdowns, once again it seemed like signs were pointing up for the Wentzster. But although he was able to play well throughout the season, it wasn't good enough during an India trip to the postseason, as they fell short with a 9-8 record following a rough loss to Jacksonville in the last game of the year.
Wentz over the middle and through the hands of his intended receiver and intercepted.
Much like his time in Philly, Carson played well, but wasn't able to win the games that counted. So once again, he was on the chopping block that offseason, and this time went to a former division rival.
Carson Wentz is a commander.
Along with his 2nd and 7th round pick, and with a few of their own, Wentz was traded to the Washington Commanders, as he was yet again given a chance to reinvent himself. So going into 2022, many were curious if Carson was going to take his game up a notch, or peter out like he had done year after year. Against Jacksonville in the opener, Carson put up over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns, as this time he started off the year with a good old W. But although he was able to put together yet another solid performance with over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns against Detroit, this time around, Goff got the best of the Wenster. Although he put together 2 solid performances against Jacksonville and Detroit, Week 3 brought about the first true test against the good old Jalen Hurts-led Eagles, a team that Carson was oh so familiar with. So needless to say, I'm sure he was eager to prove his former team wrong, and hopefully showed that they made a mistake. But in short, he didn't.
Wentz, another drop back where he has to scramble and move, and that ball may have come out loose.
Wentz wasn't able to do all that much against Philly, with just over 200 yards passing and not a single touchdown as he lost by 16. And upon that, the following week against Dallas didn't go all that much better, as his 170 and 2 picks led to yet another 2-touchdown loss to make it 3 in a row. Going up against Tennessee the following week, the hope was that Carson and the Commanders could get back on the right track following an underwhelming string of games. But although he played well all game, when it really counted, this happened. You would think that things couldn't possibly get worse for a man, but in what was yet another underwhelming performance against Chicago, Wentz got a bit banged up. After fracturing his ring finger, Carson was placed on IR for the next 2 months, and even though he was initially benched when he came back, after some underwhelming play by good old Taylor Heineke, he was at least able to put up 120 and a touchdown in what was already a losing battle against San Francisco. Even though he couldn't lead them to win that game, he was able to earn the starting spot going into a must-win against Cleveland, but it didn't exactly go that well.
Wentz, deep ball. Dotson in double coverage, and it's picked on today by Delpit.
3 interceptions and less than 150 through the air is not going to win you any football games, and so it was a sour note to end what was already a disappointing year for Carson. In 8 games that season, he passed for just over 1,700 yards and 11 touchdowns, along with a rough 9 picks, as he led the Commanders to a 2-6 record in that time. So needless to say, although he didn't do fantastic in Indy, this was a major step down for the Wenster, so what happened next was not all that big a surprise.
After just 1 season, the team has released quarterback Carson Wentz.
In a matter of 6 years, Carson went from an MVP candidate to an afterthought, and although it seems like a lot of time, it's really been over the course of the past 3 years where times have been pretty rough for him. Although he put up decent stats in Indy, Carson wasn't able to win big games, and he had the same problem in Washington, and even back in Philly, which his replacement seemed to do with ease.
A juggle of the snap, Hurts found it, and there's the end zone ahead for another Philadelphia touchdown.
If you look at the stats, Carson really only has had 2 bad seasons, which were his last year in Philly and what just happened in Washington. So honestly, if he could have won a single playoff game at that time, maybe all of this wouldn't have happened. But even then, he's only 30, which is not too old for quarterbacks anymore, so I'm sure that he'll get plenty of opportunities. But now it's looking like they may be in the backup role instead of the starter. Although, let's just say that if he went to a team like Tampa Bay or Carolina, considering the lack of depth, he can maybe be back in the driver's seat once again. Or maybe they'll just draft someone. You really never know. Thankfully for Carson, this free agency is not all that crazy, outside of good old Aaron Rodgers, because it's really only Derek Carr and Jimmy G, so there's not all that much competition. It's really the fact that Carson is coming off arguably the worst season of his career that makes this so tricky. Even then, since Tampa Bay is dealing with salary cap issues, they probably won't be able to get someone like Derek or Jimmy, so maybe Carson will get another opportunity to reinvent himself with the Bucs, in what would likely be his last chance to prove that he has what it takes to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. The beauty of football is that you really never know what's going to happen next, so all you can do is sit back and watch the show. But anyways, what do you guys think? Is Carson Wentz's time in the NFL over, or is he going to have a shot at redemption? Comment down below your thoughts. Carson Wentz was once one of the most exciting players in football, but let's just say that the past few years have not been great for him, so it'll be very interesting to see what happens next.
2nd and 7. Wentz taking a deep shot, and it is caught! Brown again!
Thanks for watching the video. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe, like, turn on post notifications, and comment down below your thoughts. But anyways, see you all soon, and have a great rest of your day.
But this is a huge mistake on the part of Carson Wentz.